1862, the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act of 1862 represented America's last great land policy. It was enacted on the eve of the Civil War and provided that anyone living on land for 5 years while making some improvements could acquire a free title to 160 acres. At This act remained in effect until 1900 and provided 400,000 to 600,000 white families with homes and farms. Of all the public land that this act passed into private hands, of all the public land that this act passed into private hands, not more than 11 to 17% was settled by homesteaders. By 1900, most of the land had gone to speculators, who thus acquired the claims to rich western lands, timber, and mineral rights without having to bid or compete for the wealth. Blacks were unable to acquire any of this last time giveaway of land wealth. Many were interested, but had their lives threatened by whites and decided to not pursue the free land. This acquisition policy of the Homestead Act was that anyone who tended the land should not have to pay for it. But again, hypocrisy, right? Not one had spent more time tending land than blacks, or no one had spent more time tending land than blacks. Certainly not European immigrants. Yet, even free blacks were not allowed to participate in the famous land rush in the West. Both free and enslaved blacks were forced to delay their land ownership dreams and await the freedom that the Civil War would bring. Blacks were legally freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, but the end of their servitude did not result in receiving the compensation that was given to white indentured servants. At the end of their servitude, white indentured servants typically received a small parcel of land as well as a suit of clothing, farming tools, crop seeds, livestock, some money, and some guns. These were the minimum tools needed to earn a living and protect one's family. Emancipation set blacks free as ignorant, penniless, defenseless, landless, powerless, and non-competitive human beings. Nearly 5 million blacks were made wards of the public, dependent upon handouts, welfare, or whatever they could steal in order to survive. Emancipation set blacks free as ignorant, penniless, defenseless, landless, powerless, and non-competitive human beings. Nearly 5 million blacks were made wards of the public. Nearly 5 million blacks were made wards of the public, depended upon handouts, welfare, or whatever they could steal in order to survive. No attempts were made to correct the centuries of social engineering to which black slaves had been exposed. They had no homes or friends in either the North or South. When they asked for a little help or hand up, President Andrew Johnson in 1866, with Southern states' encouragements, slapped them in their sullen black faces by vetoing a congressional bill that would have given black slaves a mere 40 acres and a mule as compensation for 250 years of bondage. Southern slaveholders, the leisure class. Until recent times, Southerners sought to build and maintain a non working class of aristocrats that prided itself on a lifestyle of unearned leisure that resulted from black labor. The Southerners' view of blacks and work. The Southerners' view of blacks and work was based on their definition of work and their exploitation of natural resources. Sitting on the verandas or under the old oak trees became a way of life. It was as much a southern reality as a southern mystique. The South's leisure degenerated into laziness. The South's the South's leisure leisure the South's leisure degenerated into laziness. Blacks were the working class. Whites were the management class that enjoyed seasonal light work. Successful planters bragged about not having to do dirty, hard nigger work. In accordance with the National Anti-Black Policy, Public Policy, see Chapter 7, blacks remained the working class while whites took credit for being the management or brains behind black labor. More to say for you. Mm. White indentured servants, temporary labor only. The dream of living in a world with unlimited free land and economic opportunities appealed to impoverished whites still living in Europe. Many whites were willing to sell or contract their labor to white owners for an opportunity to live and work in the New World. For the cost of transportation from Europe, many whites signed indentured servitude contracts. A typical contract lasted for 7 years, but actually it rarely lasted beyond the servant's 21st birthday. Let's see, unlike slaves, white servants retained some personal rights, for example, the right to sue, testify in court, etc., etc. And at the end of their period of servitude, they received monetary compensation and basic necessities for establishing a homestead and earning a living. Disgruntled indentured servants occasionally renegotiated their contracts in order to receive better provisions, or they simply broke the contracts by fleeing and establishing their own homestead on the frontier land that was available and free to any white person. The instability of the servant servant labor force killed the indentured servant system. By the mid 1600s, it became clear that indentured white servants were not meeting the plantation owners' labor and production needs. Moreover, the landowners could not impose complete physical and psychological control over white indentured servants. Therefore, the landowners could not maximize profits. Since the landowners had abandoned using captured Indians as slaves, whites found that black slavery, which was flourishing in the Caribbean and South America, was the most viable labor alternative. Furthermore, England had recognized the enormous economic potential in supplying slaves to the plantations. Though England had hoped to keep North America as an English nation, labor demands in the North American colonies persuaded England to organize the Royal African Company in 1672 in order to supply and coordinate her slave trading activities in the New World. With the labor question resolved, the expropriation with the labor question resolved, the expropriation of Indian land to European whites had to occur as quickly as possible. The expropriation of Indian land to European whites had to occur as quickly as possible. Between 1607 and 1887, European whites acquired nearly every valuable square foot of Indian land via theft, legal discrimination, and occasional purchase, and the violation of more than 371 Indian treaties. The American government's American government's redistribution of Indian land amounted to preferential treatment or affirmative action for white settlers, especially when combined with the government's facilitation of black slavery. Moreover, to increase land utilization, some states like North and South Carolina granted free land to white settlers simply for owning slaves. In 1663, okay, in 1663, these states offered 20 acres of land to every white male who owned a black female slave. Such land rewards encouraged miscegenation practices between white slave owners and black female slaves. This practice also increased the slave owners' slave holdings and raised the black female to a higher, more acceptable level over the black male slave. The dream of owning freedom and land. The dream of owning freedom and land, which drew white settlers to America and liberated them from feudal oppression in Europe, was black people's worst nightmare. It smothers blacks' dreams by shackling them into endless human exploitation. Timeline 1705 to 1760. 1705, slave codes enacted. Virginia, 1710. Virginia established a slave squealing system. More than 150 slave revolts attempted, nearly all exposed by black informers. Slave revolt exposed in Newport. 1723. Government prohibits slave manumissions except for informers. Slave revolt exposed in Maryland. Hey Google, what is manumission?
According to Wikipedia, manumission or enfranchisement is the act of freeing slaves by their owners. Different approaches to manumission were developed, each specific to the time and place of a particular society.
Slave revolt exposed in Maryland. 1738, 1740. South Carolina enacts Negro Act of 1740. Northern segregation began. South and North Carolina offered free land, 1760, and free land to white males who owned female slaves. Black labor, the greatest source of white wealth. A bit of sense. Before discussing more recent ways that whites have created bridges to wealth and power, it would be beneficial to take one final look at the economic impact that black slavery had and continues to have on economies in America and worldwide. A close examination of financial data reveals why whites have been so adamant about keeping blacks as a permanent underclass of laborers. The world saw blacks and their labor as sources of wealth, black gold, black gold, black gold, Texas tea. The first thing you know, England was the king of slave trading nations. Not only was it the dominant slave trader, but was also the primary beneficiary of wealth produced by slaves in the Americas and Caribbean islands. As discussed earlier in Chapter 4, the English system was the harshest and undoubtedly the most profitable of the six major slave trading nations. For example, by 1795, Liverpool, England alone had more than 100 ships carrying slaves. This fleet of ships accounted for 50% of Europe's slave trade. Overall, overall, during the 1700s, slave trading revenues expanded England's foreign trade by more than 700%, and annual slave trade revenues averaged nearly $5 million, which in today's dollars would be nearly $50 billion annually. Slave trading and the related commercial activities were so lucrative that these activities alone elevated England from a poor nation to the single most powerful nation in the world. In 1860, annual sales of slave produced cotton generated more than $30 billion for England. Meanwhile, English textile mills were still annually manufacturing increasing levels of cotton goods for retail sales. England's trading relationships with American slave plantations were so profitable that England viewed the prospect of an American Civil War to free black slaves as a significant threat to its national interests. England was well aware that growth in English economy and the establishment of its industrial infrastructure was founded upon slave-produced products. In fact, in 1840 and 1844, England announced in the Report of Foreign Nations that since 1808, $4 billion of fixed capital has been invested in preparation for cotton goods that were wholly dependent upon slave trade or slave labor. England was not willing to lose that large financial investment or the steady flow of wealth from black labor without a fight. in an effort to maintain more than 2.5 centuries, in an effort to maintain the institutions of slavery that had benefited the English nation for more than 2.5 centuries, England offered to intervene in American domestic affairs in order to prolong slavery. In addition, many within England's private business sector contributed financially to pro-slavery organizations in America. Timeline 1775 to 1800. 1775. U.S. Constitution codified black subordination. 1787, Northwest Territory land closed to blacks. First immigration law, 1790. The first immigration law specified whites only. Invention of the cotton gin. 1793. 1790, slavery on decline. Value of slaves dropped. Some set free. Gin. Colonies make fugitive slave. Comparison of slave, land, and cotton prices. 1800. Average slave prices $600 per acre. Public land prices. 1810. Something else. Oh, Papa, I don't know what to tell you.